Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to address nitric oxide and mental health in the time of this pandemic. In the context of this pandemic, it appears likely there will be substantial increases in anxiety and depression, substance use, loneliness, domestic violence, and with the schools closed, there's a very real possibility of an epidemic of child abuse. Anti-anxiety drugs are up by 34%. Antidepressant meds jumped by 19%, and sleeping prescription meds saw a 15% increase. This report notes that Americans are becoming increasingly anxious as the pandemic continues and underscores the impact the virus is having on mental health. And I just read a quote from the CDC director a few minutes ago, and he said, "We are seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now from deaths from COVID than from deaths from COVID. Far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess than we are seeing from COVID." So mental health we're all being challenged right now. And whatever we can do to help that, that's what we're going to do. And nitric oxide is part of that puzzle. Next. There are numerous ways that nitric oxide influences mental health. Studies have shown that restoring nitric oxide production will not only help you feel better, think better, sleep better, have less anxiety, and have less depression. So what are the factors that are affecting our nitric oxide formation? Number one, aging. As we get older, our ability to make nitric oxide through the arginine NOS pathway diminishes exponentially. By the time we are 40, our ability to make nitric oxide through the NOS pathway decreases to about 50%. By the time we're 60, it's decreased to about 15%. Then we've got the diet. The standard American diet, the SAD diet, that is so deficient in the nitrate-rich veggies. The lack of exercise. Exercise increases our nitric oxide production. Many medications influence that NOS enzyme. Antibacterials, antidepressants, NSAIDs, birth control pills, PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, decrease the stomach acid, but the PPIs decrease our ability to form nitric oxide through both pathways, through the arginine NOS pathway and through the nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway. Pollution increases oxidative stress. Anything that increases oxidative stress uncouples the NOS enzyme and decreases our production of nitric oxide. Chemicals, heavy metals, even mold will decrease our production of nitric oxide. Genetic SNPs. And it's not just about our NOS enzymes. Those are important, but also any of the enzymes that deal with oxidative stress. Your SOD, your catalase, your HFE SNPs, your iron dysregulation, your HMOX SNPs. Anything affects the BH4 production, like DHFR or QDPR, or the big one, MTHFR. When you have SNPs in MTHFR, you can't make your BH4. BH4 deficiency is one of the main reasons NOS gets uncoupled. And when NOS gets uncoupled, what this means is NOS becomes a superoxide producing enzyme instead of a nitric oxide producing enzyme. And stress, the big one here. Chronic stress causes inflammation and damage to all cells in the body, including those of the blood vessels and immune cells, like your eNOS, your iNOS. All of these factors decrease our formation of nitric oxide. Next slide. So this is what I was talking about, the progression of endothelial dysfunction. So in the 20s, we're making nitric oxide, cranking it out, everything's hunky-dory. By the time we're 40, our ability to make nitric oxide through the NOS enzyme decreases to about 50%. And by the time we're 60, our production of nitric oxide decreases to about 15%. So nitric oxide governs the circulation and microcirculation. And blood flow to the brain carrying oxygen, nutrients, and glucose, and the carrying away of the debris can affect your brain performance, cognition, and sense of well-being. Nitric oxide is released during enhanced neuronal activity to mediate that cerebral blood flow. So if we can't make the nitric oxide, the blood flow is impaired. Nitric oxide decreases neuronal inflammation and oxidative stress. Inflammation and oxidative stress are primary drivers of most chronic diseases, including mental health issues. This is really important, and I will bring this concept up a few times during this webinar. Next slide. We consume the nitrates. They get absorbed, gets concentrated in the salivary glands. The salivary glands release the nitrates. We've got good anaerobic bacteria on the dorsal aspect of our tongue that will reduce that nitrate to nitrite. Some of that nitrite gets reduced further to nitric oxide in the stomach, the acidic environment of the stomach, but most of the nitrite acts like a nitric oxide storage form, circulates around in the body, and we have different nitrite reductases in our tissue, like myoglobin can act like a nitrite reductase in our muscles. But these will further reduce that nitrite to nitric oxide, increasing nitric oxide bioavailability. Nitrites decrease reactive oxygen species, decrease the superoxide production. If you're decreasing the superoxide production, you're decreasing the peroxynitrite production, the oh no molecule. So this pathway does not need BH4 in order to produce nitric oxide. So there you've got your BH4 in bioavailable to help you make your neurotransmitters. Next slide. Anxiety and depression are the most frequent psychiatric conditions and the cause of loss of quality of life in the United States. So nitric oxide is involved in the regulation of anxiety-like behavior. Low nitric oxide, high anxiety. High nitric oxide, low anxiety. Anxiety and depression are associated with low levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. Nitric oxide mediates the neuroprotective actions of BDNF in promoting neuronal survival and stimulating the process of neurogenesis. Inducing this neurogenesis in the hypothalamus and the cerebral cortex enhances learning and memory. Nitric oxide plays a role in synaptic plasticity, which positively influences mood. Nitrates increase the production of BH4, helping to increase the production of neurotransmitters. So over here on this diagram, you will see BH4 is required by the NOS enzyme to take arginine into nitric oxide. But it's also required in the metabolization of phenylalanine to tyrosine. And the tyrosine can go on and make your thyroid hormones. BH4 is required in the metabolization of tyrosine to L-DOPA, on to dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. BH4 is required to take your tryptophan into 5-HTP, and then on to serotonin and melatonin. So having the nitrates be able to increase the production of BH4 helps you modulate your neurotransmitters for healthier moods. Next slide. Sleep. We all know if we don't get enough sleep, how we feel. Not very good. Mental health and sleep patterns have a complex and important relationship that's essential in regulating moods and emotions. REM sleep plays a significant role in maintaining emotional well-being and psychological balance. Nitric oxide regulates the release of acetylcholine and consequently the occurrence of REM sleep. REM sleep is an age-dependent process involving nitric oxide. When we lose the ability to produce adequate nitric oxide, sleep becomes disturbed, and circadian rhythm is nitric oxide mediated. So when we've lost our production of nitric oxide, not only are we not getting as much REM sleep as we need, our circadian rhythm is off. Next slide. The gut-brain connection plays an essential role in our feeling of well-being. What happens in our gut affects our brain, and what happens in our brain affects our gut. The microbiome diversity is the foundation for health and longevity. The mucus is our first line of defense against bad bacteria in our gut. The gastric mucosal integrity is mediated by nitric oxide. Nitric oxide also mediates the mucosal blood flow. So this will determine whether things get absorbed or not. Nitric oxide works in the GI tract to maintain homeostasis. Gastroparesis is a nitric oxide deficiency. The use of antibiotics has long been linked to leaky gut or the altered intestinal permeability. There's many common mental health symptoms associated with leaky gut, including anxiety, depression, brain fog, severe fatigue. Nitrates will increase the good bacteria and the good population of the microbiome in the gut, as well as the oral microbiome. So the nitrates are a healthy food for the gut microbiome and the oral microbiome. There are studies showing that if somebody is on an antimicrobial, whether it's prescription or herbal, that if you supplement nitrates while they're on these antimicrobials, you will protect the tight junction and decrease the leaky gut reaction from these antimicrobials. Next slide. Mast cells. Mast cells are white blood cells. They're part of the immune system, but they function as a bridge between the immune and the nervous system. The mast cells contain numerous inflammatory mediators: histamine, the cytokines, the chemokines. All of these can cause inflammation in the brain. Remember what I said about inflammation causing anxiety, irritability, depression. The nitrites and nitric oxide inhibit this mast cell degranulation. The nitrates and nitric oxide inhibits the mast cell generation of these reactive oxygen species, the superoxide. And remember, once again, there are increased inflammatory processes in neuropsychiatric issues such as depression and anxiety. Next slide. Stress. So stress produces glucocorticoids like cortisol. These negatively affect our ability to make nitric oxide. And cortisol is one of the only hormones that increases as we age instead of decrease like all the other hormones. Stress from any source increases cortisol in the body. The adrenal production of cortisol is increased when there's a deficiency of nitric oxide. So we've got this bad vicious cycle. We've got stress, decreases the nitric oxide, the decrease in nitric oxide increases the cortisol, and you're on this bad vicious cycle. So the cortisol inhibits INOS, thus the impaired immune response. That's why when we're stressed, we get sick easier. Cortisol impairs eNOS, thus the cardiovascular implications, the hypertension, the cardiovascular disease, the heart attacks. Stress increases oxidative stress in the mitochondria, the NADPH oxidase, and xanthine oxidase, increasing superoxide. And remember, when we increase superoxide, this decreases our ability to make nitric oxide. Cortisol decreases the synthesis of BH4. Not only does this increase NOS uncoupling, which increases the superoxide production, it also inhibits us making all of those good neurotransmitters. Our serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, melatonin, even our thyroid hormone. Cortisol actually reduces the membrane transfer of arginine, so not as much can even get into our system. So all of these factors decrease the production of and or make nitric oxide less bioavailable. And we'll be talking more on nitric oxide and hormones next month. I'm working on that right now. Next slide. So as a summary, our nitric oxide production naturally declines with age, reducing to 50% by the time we're 40 and as little as 15% by the time we're 60. Restoring nitric oxide by supporting the nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway has been shown to increase the nitric oxide outright and to scavenge free radicals, inhibit the NADPH oxidase enzyme production of superoxide, recouple the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, increase synthesis of BH4 to help recouple NOS, increase our production of neurotransmitters. All of these decrease oxidative stress and increase the production of nitric oxide. And remember, inflammation and oxidative stress are primary drivers. It's at the base of most chronic diseases, including the mental health issues that we are faced now. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Beth. I do have a couple questions that came in.
Okay.
So the first one is the link between antidepressants and erectile dysfunction tied to their effects on nitric oxide?
It is. The antidepressants decrease eNOS. And you've got to have nitric oxide in order to be able to perform. So even if you decide to take one of the PDE5 inhibitor drugs, the Cialis, the Viagra, they only work in about 50% of the people because they require adequate nitric oxide in order to work. So you've got to have enough nitric oxide to get the erection, and then those drugs will allow that erection to hang around longer.
Okay, thank you. And then the second one is, how long after patients increase their nitrate intake will they notice improvements in cognitive health?
Well, everybody's different, but I've had a lot of people even notice something on the first dosage. They notice that they're not as anxious, that they might have a little more energy. But sometimes it takes a little while to build up. It just depends on where your body's at, what's going on. So I don't want this just to be a pill that you take. You know, I want a good, clean diet. I want exercise. I want a cleaning up of the chemicals in your house, you know, on your body. I mean, all of those factors affecting nitric oxide formation, those are all areas you need to address too. It's not just about taking a pill, but the pill definitely will help you get on your way.
Okay, thank you so much. If anyone else has any other questions, definitely feel free to email me, reach out to me. My phone number and email are here. I can pass them on to Beth. I can always connect you with Beth directly if you'd like to speak with her. And we really appreciate you being here. And again, look forward to an email from us that will have the webinar replay if you'd like to go back and re-listen, take any notes, and definitely reach out to us if you do need anything. Thanks again, Beth, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.